Hello, my friends, and welcome to Night Whisper. This is a quiet place where we drift together into an unanswered skies, slowly, calmly, and without fear. Here, we don't rush toward conclusions. We listen, we observe, and we let the mystery breathe. If these stories bring you a sense of calm or keep you company through the night, you're always welcome to stay with us. Subscribing gently helps this space grow, and it allows more quiet minds to find their way here. You can also leave a soft, like if the story helps you relax, unwind, or feel less alone beneath the night sky. And if any thoughts rise as you listen, you are welcome to share them in the comments below. And just out of quiet curiosity, where are you listening from tonight? I love seeing how far these whispers travel through the dark. Chapter 1. The Silent Highway. Time usually behaves like a promise. It moves forward with quiet confidence, never asking for attention, never demanding belief. The sun lifts itself from the horizon. Shadows shorten and stretch. Clocks advance their narrow hands. In obedient increments, we plan our lives around this rhythm without thinking about it, trusting that one moment will follow the next as reliably as breath follows breath. Time, we assume, will always be there. Yet for a scattered few on certain nights, in certain places that promise loosens. Not with drama, not with warning. Time does not shatter or scream. It simply slips its grip, and in that loosening, something else steps forward. Begin here. It is late, though not late enough to feel dangerous. The road is familiar, the kind you could drive half asleep and still know every curve. Trees line the shoulder in uneven ranks, their branches reaching inward, knitting a loose canopy over the asphalt. The night is clear. Stars hang sharp and distant, indifferent witnesses. Inside the car, the world narrows to a warm, enclosed space. The dashboard glows amber, steady and reassuring. The air carries the faint scent of fabric and dust, warmed by the heater. Your hands rest lightly on the steering wheel, fingers relaxed, muscles loose with habit. The engine murmurs, tires whisper against the road. You are alone, but not lonely. This is the gentle solitude of a familiar drive, the rare luxury of being unobserved. Thoughts drift without urgency. Tomorrow's coffee, the book waiting on the nightstand, a half-remembered conversation from earlier in the day. Nothing important, nothing sharp. You glance at the clock. 10:12 p.m., the number settles easily in your mind. You calculate without effort. 15 minutes, perhaps a little more if you catch the long light at the intersection. You will be home soon. You always are. The headlights carve a pale corridor through the darkness. Painted lines rise toward you and dissolve beneath the hood. The repetition is soothing, almost hypnotic. Road, shadow, road again. Your breathing deepens to match the motion. Everything is exactly where it should be. Then, without announcing itself, the night changes. It is subtle at first, so subtle you nearly miss it. The hum of the tires softens, as if the sound has been wrapped in thick cloth. The engine's murmur feels farther away, no longer anchored to the space around you. Even the air inside the car seems to grow dense, resistant, as though you are moving through something heavier than atmosphere. You adjust your grip on the wheel. The dashboard light appears sharper now, not brighter. Exactly, just too precise. Edges look overly defined, as though someone has turned the contrast up to high. Shadows lose their softness. They cling to surfaces instead of blending. You blink once, then again. The road is still there. The trees have not moved. Nothing obvious is wrong. Nothing. And yet, a quiet tension coils beneath your ribs. The radio, when did it turn off? You are certain it had been playing earlier, some low, forgettable song. But now, there is nothing. No static. No signal. Just an absence so complete, it feels intentional. Outside the car, the night is gone, unnaturally still. No insects sing. No wind combs through the branches. The forest presses close, holding its breath. The silence does not feel empty. It feels occupied, as though something unseen has stepped into the space where sound used to live. You become acutely aware of your body, the weight of your shoulders against the seat. the steady pressure of the seatbelt across your chest, the slow, deliberate rhythm of your heart. Each sensation registers with heightened clarity, stripped of distraction. You check the mirrors. Nothing. The road ahead stretches clean and empty. No headlights approach from behind. No taillights glow in the distance. You are alone in a way that feels suddenly absolute. A flicker of unease passes through you, not fear. Exactly. But a questioning, a sense that something fundamental has shifted without permission. You glance at the clock again. The numbers have changed. 10:12 p.m. the same. You frown. That cannot be right. You have been driving for several minutes since you last checked. You know this stretch of road. You passed the old billboard. You crossed the shallow dip near the creek. Time should have moved. You watch the clock more closely now, waiting for the minute to change. It does not. The car continues forward. The road unfolds. Your foot maintains its steady pressure on the accelerator. Everything proceeds as it should except the one thing you have always trusted to keep pace. A faint pressure gathers behind your eyes. You tell yourself, it's nothing. A trick of attention. Fatigue. People misread clocks all the time. You tear your gaze away from the dashboard and focus on the road. Ahead, something glimmers. At first, you mistake it for a reflection light caught on glass. Perhaps, or a trick of moisture in the air. But it holds its place, hovering just above the tree line. Not bright, not dim. Simply present. Your foot eases off the accelerator. The car slows without urgency. You do not remember deciding to do this. Your body has acted on its own, guided by a gravity you cannot name. The air thickens further. You feel it in your ears. A subtle pressure like altitude change. A faint vibration hums through the cabin. Not loud enough to hear, but strong enough to feel in your teeth. The light ahead does not move closer. Instead, the world seems to drift toward it. You realize, distantly, that you are no longer thinking in full sentences. Thoughts arrive as impressions, sensations, a narrowing of attention so complete that everything else home. Tomorrow, the ordinary weight of your life feels remote, almost fictional. The forest edges blur. You try to take a deeper breath and find that your lungs resist, as though the air has grown thick and syrupy. Your hands remain on the wheel, but they feel disconnected, operating at the end of a long delay. This is the moment when panic should arrive. It does not. Instead, a profound stillness settles over you. Not peace, but suspension. The instinct to flee, to react, to assert control simply disconnects. You are alert, intensely so, yet curiously unafraid. The car rolls to a stop. You do not remember braking. The engine continues to idle, its sound distant and unreal. Outside the windshield, the light hovers, steady and patient. It does not beckon. It does not threaten. It waits. Time stretches. Or perhaps it folds. You glance at the clock one last time, driven by habit more than intention. The numbers blur. And then, there is no transition you can name. No sense of falling asleep. No sense of awakening. One moment, the world holds its breath. The next, sound crashes back into existence. The engine roars too loudly. Insects resume their chorus all at once. A chaotic surge of noise. Wind rattles the leaves with sudden force. Your body jerks, muscles seizing as though startled awake from a deep sleep. The car is moving. You are driving. Your heart slams against your ribs. Breath rushes into your lungs in sharp, ragged pulls. The road ahead looks ordinary again to ordinary. The trees stand at a respectful distance. The night feels wide and indifferent. You check the clock. 12:27 a.m. The number makes no sense. A cold wave washes through you, starting at the base of your spine and radiating outward. You replay the drive in your mind, searching for missing pieces. An accident, a wrong turn, a stretch of road you forgot. Nothing fits. Your hands tremble on the wheel. You flex your fingers, grounding yourself in movement. The car continues forward, obedient and real. The road eventually delivers you home, as it always has. When you step inside, The house greets you with familiar sounds. The refrigerator hums. Floorboards sigh under your weight. The clock on the wall confirms what you already know. 2 hours have vanished. You stand there longer than necessary. Keys still in your hand, listening to the ordinary noises of your life reassert themselves. They feel comforting, but altered as though they belong to a version of the world you briefly stepped away from that night. Sleep does not come easily, and when it does, it brings dreams filled with light, pressure, and a silence so complete it feels alive. This is where the story of missing time begins, not with terror, not with answers, but with a quiet drive on a road you thought you knew, and a clock that, without explanation, refused to keep its promise. Chapter 2. The Faces in the Quiet. Mystery rarely announces itself with spectacle. It does not search for prophets or adventurers or those already leaning toward belief. Instead, it drifts toward the ordinary, settling into lives built on routine and familiarity, where its presence feels most out of place. The people who lose time are not defined by the event. They are defined by what came before it. They wake early for work. They argue gently over groceries. They keep calendars taped to refrigerators and keys in the same bowl by the door. Their lives move forward in small, predictable increments, marked by commutes, deadlines, and quiet evenings spent doing nothing remarkable at all. These are people who trust the world to behave as it always has, because it always has, until one day it doesn't. For many, the realization arrives slowly, like a bruise that darkens over hours. At first, there is only confusion, a sense that something does not quite line up, a drive that feels longer than it should, a task that seems to swallow more time than expected, a moment where the body feels out of step with the clock. They check their watches. They refresh their phones. They retrace their actions, replaying the day in careful detail. The mind searches for an explanation it can accept: fatigue, distraction, stress. Any of these will do. The truth, at this stage, is still too large to name. What unsettles them most is not the missing time itself, but the way it leaves no trace in memory. There is no blur, no fading edge. The absence is clean. Surgical, a section of life has been removed without tearing the surrounding fabric. People often say they would notice something like that immediately. They are wrong. The human mind is skilled at smoothing over discontinuity. It fills gaps instinctively, the way water settles into a depression in the ground. Only later, sometimes hours, sometimes days, does the weight of the absence assert itself. A comment from a spouse, a timestamp on a receipt, a voicemail that should not exist. That is when the quiet begins. Those who experience missing time often describe a subtle shift in how the world feels afterward. Not fear, at first, but estrangement. Familiar spaces feel slightly off, as though viewed through glass. Conversations require more effort. Sounds linger longer than they should. Sleep grows restless, interrupted by dreams that carry a strange density, heavy with sensation but light on detail. They start paying attention to their bodies, a stiffness in the neck that wasn't there before, a tenderness on the skin that draws the fingers back again and again, a sense of internal vibration, faint but persistent, like standing too close to a transformer. These sensations don't demand alarm, but they resist dismissal. Eventually, the question forms: where did the time go? Asking it aloud proves harder than expected. Friends listen politely, nodding in the right places. Someone laughs, assuming exaggeration. Another offers a story of their own forgetfulness, eager to normalize the experience. Advice follows: more sleep, fewer screens, less stress. The conversation drifts elsewhere, relieved of its discomfort. The storyteller learns quickly. There is a limit to curiosity. Push past it, and concern hardens into something colder. Raised eyebrows, a tightening around the eyes, a silence that carries judgment without words. So the question is swallowed, stored away alongside the missing hours themselves. The quiet deepens. For some, this silence becomes the heaviest part of the experience. Not the event, whatever it was, but the isolation that follows. To carry an absence no one else can see is to live with a private gravity, pulling thoughts inward, bending self-perception in subtle ways. They begin to doubt themselves. Memory, after all, is fallible. Time slips unnoticed all the time. People misremember, miscalculate, misjudge. The rational explanations line up neatly, offering a way out. Accept them, and the world snaps back into place. Reject them, and everything becomes uncertain. Many choose the first option. They locked experience away, treating it like a dream that lingered too long after waking. Life resumes. Work continues. Smiles return. But the body does not forget so easily. The dreams persist. The unease remain, quiet but insistent, tapping gently from inside. Others cannot let it go. They search, cautiously at first. Late nights spent scrolling through forums. Books pulled from library shelves under the guise of casual interest. Stories read with mounting recognition. Different voices. Different places. The same structure, a short drive. A sudden stillness. A clock that no longer agrees. This is the moment many describe as the turning point. Not fear, not revelation, but recognition. The sensation of seeing one's own reflection unexpectedly, caught in a mirror at the edge of vision. Someone else has this, too. The relief arrives before belief. Shoulders loosen. Breath deepens. The experience does not become easier, but it becomes shared, and that changes its shape. Faces begin to emerge from the quiet. There is the couple who stopped talking about the night altogether, each convinced the other remembered more. The logger who vanished for days and returned hollow-eyed, unable to reconcile his internal clock with the calendar. The teacher who arrived home long after sunset with no memory of leaving work, her keys clenched so tightly they left marks in her palm. These faces do not belong to thrill seekers. They belong to people who never ask to be part of a mystery. Their stories lack embellishment. They do not rush toward conclusions. They speak carefully, often reluctantly, measuring each word against the risk of being misunderstood. What unites them is not what they saw, but what they lost. Time is not just a measurement. It is continuity. It is the thread that allows a life to feel whole. When that thread breaks, even briefly, the rupture echoes outward, touching identity itself. Who are you, if a piece of your life exists beyond your reach? This question does not arrive fully formed. It surfaces slowly, in moments of stillness. While washing dishes, while driving, at night, while lying awake beside someone who trusts you to be present. Some experiencers describe a lingering sensation of being observed, not in a threatening way, but in the manner of someone aware they were once known intimately, thoroughly, by something they cannot see. Others report no such feeling at all, only a quiet sense of displacement, like returning to a room where the furniture has been rearranged in subtle ways. There is no single emotional response. Some carry anger, sharp and sudden, flaring when reminded of the gap. Others move through a muted sadness, an ache without a clear object. A few feel something harder to name, an expansive unease, threaded with awe, as though they brushed against a truth too large to hold comfortably. What they share is restraint. They learn to live with unanswered questions. They learn to choose carefully who is allowed to hear their story. They learn the difference between curiosity and consumption, between listening and spectacle. And slowly, often without realizing it, they change. Their attention sharpens. They notice the texture of silence. They linger longer in moments that feel anchored, grounded. Time, once taken for granted, becomes something precious, something watched. The missing hours do not define them, but they shape them. And in the quiet, among others who have felt the same fracture, they begin to understand that whatever happened did not happen to them alone. It happened through them. The faces in the quiet are not so different from our own. They belong to people who trusted the world to behave and discovered, briefly, that it does not always keep its promises. Now that we have met them, truly met them, another question begins to form. If these experiences follow patterns, if they repeat across lives and landscapes, are there places where time is more likely to fail? And what is it about the land itself that seems to invite the clock to loosen its grip? Chapter 3. The thin places. Some landscapes feel neutral. They exist to be crossed, occupied, improved upon. Roads cut through them. Cities rise. The land yields without protest. its presence fading into the background of daily life. Other places resist this arrangement. They do not announce themselves with signs or boundaries, yet those who pass through them often sense a subtle pressure, as though the air has thickened with memory. These are locations where attention sharpens without intention, where footsteps sound louder than expected, where the horizon seems to watch as much as it is watched. Across cultures and centuries, people have found words for such places. Thin places, liminal ground, sacred crossings. The names differ, but the idea remains consistent. There are regions where the distance between worlds feels reduced, where the familiar rules soften, where something ordinarily kept apart drifts closer. Those who lose time often discover, after the fact, that their experiences cluster around these landscapes. The realization rarely comes immediately. It arrives later, during careful retracing. Maps pulled out on kitchen tables, routes examined. Locations circled and reconsidered. Patterns emerge not through belief, but through repetition. Forests, where the canopy closes overhead, swallowing sound. High deserts where the sky presses down, vast and unbroken. Mountain passes, where weather shifts without warning. Coastlines where fog erases depth and distance. These places share a quality difficult to define, yet instantly recognizable once named. They feel attentive. In the Hudson Valley, the land rolls gently, deceptively calm. Rivers curve through wooded hills, mist rising at dawn like breath from a sleeping body. The area has long carried stories, long before headlights traced its roads. Indigenous traditions spoke of watchers in the sky. Early settlers recorded lights drifting over treetops, silent and deliberate. Modern accounts follow the same geography. Drivers report stalled engines along familiar routes. Campers awaken to silence so complete it feels engineered. Hikers lose hours without losing direction. Time slips without struggle, leaving behind only disorientation and a lingering sense of having crossed an invisible threshold. Further west, the desert tells the story differently. Here, nothing presses close. The land opens outward, exposing everything beneath an unbroken dome of stars. Sound travels far, then vanishes. The ground radiates heat long after sunset, releasing it slowly, patiently, like a held breath. In these regions, missing time often unfolds beneath open sky. A lone vehicle on an endless road. A campfire reduced to glowing embers. A horizon unbroken by structures or trees. People describe the same sequence. A pause in motion, a deepening stillness, an awareness that the environment has shifted its posture. The desert does not conceal what happens within it. It witnesses without comment. Mountains introduce another variation. Here, the land asserts itself through scale and instability. Slopes fall away sharply. Weather gathers without warning. Sound bends and rebounds in unpredictable ways. In such places, the body remains alert even at rest, tuned to changes in air and pressure. Those who lose time in mountainous regions often report heightened bodily sensations preceding the event. A heaviness in the chest, a faint ringing in the ears, a sense of internal vibration. The environment seems to compress, drawing attention inward even as the peaks loom outward. What unites these varied landscapes is not appearance, but behavior. They disrupt orientation. Human perception evolved to rely on certain constants, sound patterns, visual depth, predictable motion. Thin places interfere with these anchors. Silence arrives abruptly. Distance collapses or stretches. Time loses its familiar rhythm. The land does not feel hostile in these moments, nor does it feel welcoming. It feels purposeful, as though performing a function that does not include human comfort as a priority. Those who return to these locations often describe a complicated pull. Part of them resists. Muscles tense without instruction. The body remembers something the mind cannot fully access. Another part leans forward, drawn by an unspoken familiarity, an impression of unfinished business. The land remembers too. This idea unsettles many at first. We are accustomed to thinking of memory as a human possession, locked inside brains and recorded histories. But landscapes store their own narratives in erosion, in altered growth patterns, in the quiet persistence of paths walked for generations. When people speak of places where time fails, they often return to the same coordinates across decades. even centuries. New roads overlay old trails, power lines cross ancient valleys. The surface changes, but the underlying pattern remains. The question arises naturally, though few ask it aloud. Is the land merely a stage, or is it an active participant? Scientific explanations hover at the edges of this question. Geological fault lines generate electromagnetic fluctuations. Mineral-rich soil interferes with perception. Atmospheric conditions distort light and sound. Each theory offers a piece of the puzzle, yet none accounts fully for the consistency of human experience. People do not simply become lost in these places. They become paused. The sensation reported again and again is not confusion, but suspension. A moment where forward motion ceases. Not physically, but perceptually. The world holds steady, stripped of momentum, as though waiting for something to complete a cycle unseen. In folklore, thin places were treated with caution. Travelers avoided them at certain hours. Offerings were left at their edges. Stories warned of time passing differently within them, nights that lasted moments, moments that stretched into years. Those who returned were changed, marked not by injury, but by distance from the life they had known. Modern language strips these stories of their mysticism, yet the structure remains intact. A person enters a place. The ordinary rules loosen. Time departs its usual course. The person returns altered, carrying an absence no one else can see. Even those skeptical of any larger explanation find themselves unsettled by the repetition. Why here? Why not everywhere? The answer, if it exists, does not announce itself. It waits in the overlap between environment and perception, between external condition and internal state. Thin places do not create the experience alone. They amplify something already present, already possible. Those who have lost time often report that returning to such locations feels different afterward. The land appears unchanged, yet the relationship has shifted. Where once it was scenery, it now feels conversational, silent, but engaged. A road no longer feels like just a road. A clearing no longer feels empty. The desert especially resists indifference. Its vastness does not comfort. It clarifies under its sky. Humans shrink to their essential scale. There is no hiding from time there except, paradoxically, when time itself steps aside. Perhaps this is why so many encounters unfold far from cities, far from noise and artificial light. Thin places demand attention. They strip away distraction until only awareness remains. And awareness, once sharpened, becomes a doorway. If the land can soften the boundary, if certain environments invite the pause, then the next question becomes unavoidable. What happens in that pause? What condition settles over the world when time loosens its grip? And why do those who enter it describe the same uncanny stillness, the same suspension of fear, the same sense of being gently removed from the flow of ordinary life? To answer that, we must move closer to the moment itself, to the threshold where sound disappears, where motion slows, where reality acquires a peculiar, unmistakable texture, to what many have come to call the Oz factor. Chapter 4. The Oz factor. There is a moment, described again and again by those who lose time, when the world changes its texture. Not its appearance, not at first, but its feel. The shift arrives quietly, without spectacle. No flash of light, no thunder. Instead, the environment seems to withdraw from itself, as though reality has taken a half-step back and left a space behind. Sound is the first to go. It does not fade gradually. It stops. 1 second, insects hum. Wind moves through leaves. Distant traffic murmurs. The next, there is nothing. Not silence in the ordinary sense, but an absence so complete it presses against the ears, creating a faint internal ringing. People often say the quiet feels engineered, as though someone has turned a dial. With sound removed, space behaves differently. Distances become unreliable. Objects appear sharper, outlined with unnatural clarity. Shadows cling to surfaces instead of dissolving. Depth flattens, then deepens, as if the eyes cannot agree on how far away anything truly is. Light behaves strangely too. Colors lose warmth. Whites lean toward blue or gray. Reflections appear where none should exist, hovering briefly before vanishing. Even familiar environments take on a staged quality, like a meticulously constructed set waiting for actors to arrive. This is the Oz factor. The name comes from a comparison made by researchers and experiencers alike. The moment Dorothy steps into Oz, and everything becomes vividly unreal. Hyper-detailed, eerily still, charged with significance. It is not a dream state. It is sharper than waking life, not softer. The body reacts before the mind can interpret. Breathing slows, then deepens. Muscles loosen without instruction. Heart rate steadies where fear should ignite. Something else settles instead, a neutral attentiveness. Calm but alert. People later struggle to explain this absence of panic. They know, intellectually, that something is wrong. Sound has vanished. Time behaves strangely. The environment feels staged, yet the instinct to flee does not engage. The nervous system seems overridden. Some describe a sensation of pressure, not painful, but pervasive. It gathers behind the eyes, across the chest, inside the skull. Others notice a faint vibration, as though standing near heavy machinery felt through the bones rather than the ears. Smell often disappears entirely. Taste too. The senses narrow, focusing attention forward, inward, and outward. All at once, awareness sharpens to a fine point, unencumbered by emotional noise. Thought becomes economical, purposeful, observant. In this state, agency shifts. People report attempting to move, and finding their bodies respond with delay, or not at all. Feet feel anchored, arms feel light, imprecise. Speech, when attempted, falters or refuses to form. The body remains upright, conscious, functioning, yet partially removed from command. It is not paralysis, it is permission withdrawn. The world, during these moments, does not feel threatening, nor does it feel welcoming. It feels intentional, as though the environment has been arranged for a reason not yet revealed. This is often when time begins to behave improperly. Clocks freeze. Digital displays blur or repeat numbers. Watches stop entirely or resume later without explanation. People glance away and back again, expecting correction that never comes, yet time does not feel stopped. It feels irrelevant. Moments stretch without duration. Seconds lose their identity. There is only sequence without measurement, awareness without progress. The usual forward pull of time, the sense of next dissolves. And still, fear does not arrive. Instead, many report an odd emotional flattening. Anxiety dissolves. Urgency evaporates. Even curiosity softens, replaced by a receptive neutrality, a willingness to observe without resistance. This emotional state unsettles people more than any visual anomaly. Later, they ask themselves, why wasn't I afraid? The question lingers because it challenges a core assumption that humans respond predictably to threat. The Oz factor disrupts that assumption completely. It suggests that fear, like time, can be suspended under certain conditions. Researchers have noted that this state resembles neither fight nor flight, but something else entirely, a third response characterized by compliance without distress, alertness without agitation, a pause in the nervous system. Within this pause, memory formation changes. People recall impressions rather than sequences, sensations without clear source, emotions without narrative context. The mind records fragments, not stories. Details emerge later, often disjointed, resistant to linear reconstruction. This may explain why missing time feels so clean. There is no blur, no confusion, no sense of fading consciousness. The mind remains awake, but it stops recording in the way it usually does. Experience occurs without being archived properly. When sound eventually returns, it does so abruptly. Insects resume their chorus all at once. Wind surges through trees. Engines roar too loudly. The body startles, heart racing, breath hitching, as if waking from a deep, sudden sleep. Time snaps back into place. People find themselves standing, driving, walking, mid-action with no sense of transition. The environment appears ordinary again, stripped of its unnatural clarity, its charged stillness. Only the clock betrays what happened. Minutes have become hours. Hours have vanished entirely. The ass factor leaves no visible residue, no scorched earth, no altered structures. The world continues as though nothing occurred. It is this normalcy that unsettles people most. How can something so profound leave so little behind? The answer may lie in the nature of the state itself. The Oz factor does not tear reality open. It slides it aside. It creates a pocket of altered conditions. Sensory, temporal, emotional. Then closes it seamlessly, like a stage curtain lifted and lowered without sound. Those who experience it often say, the world never feels quite the same afterward. Not because it looks different, but because it no longer feels guaranteed. They have learned, viscerally, that reality can pause without warning. And if it can pause, then something must be capable of initiating that pause. The Oz factor is not the encounter itself. It is the threshold. The moment when the environment changes posture, when the body quiets, when time loosens its hold not as an accident, but as preparation. To understand what follows, we must turn away from the landscape and the senses, and toward the most reliable witness of all the body. Chapter 5. The body's testimony. Memory is negotiable. It bends. It edits. It softens sharp edges and rearranges sequence to preserve coherence. The body, however, is less accommodating. It records without narrative, without concern for comfort or explanation. Long after the mind has moved on, the body continues to carry its annotations. For those who lose time, the body often speaks first. The discovery is rarely immediate. It arrives later, during ordinary moments, pulling on a shirt, brushing teeth, stepping into the shower. Fingers pause, attention narrows. There is a mark where none should be an ache. That does not belong to yesterday's labor. These are not injuries in the conventional sense. They do not throb or swell. They do not announce themselves with pain. Instead, they exist quietly, stubbornly, refusing to align with memory. Small, circular impressions, linear reddenings, areas of skin that feel oddly numb or overly sensitive to touch. People trace these marks without realizing they are doing so, returning to them repeatedly, as though expecting an explanation to surface beneath the skin. Bruises appear without impact. Burn-like patterns emerge without heat. Tiny punctures form in precise arrangements, too deliberate to dismiss as coincidence. Medical examinations often yield little. The skin looks healthy. Blood work returns normal. Imaging reveals nothing remarkable. And yet, something has been altered. Some experiencers reported deep, localized soreness, as though tissue beneath the surface has been manipulated rather than damaged. Muscles feel fatigued in isolation, unrelated to exertion. Joints protest movement without warning, then release just as suddenly. Sleep becomes complicated. The body grows heavy at night, resistant to rest, then drops abruptly into exhaustion. Dreams arrive thick with sensation, pressure, light, motion, yet dissolve upon waking, leaving only the impression of having traveled far without knowing where. Doctors ask practical questions. Any recent accidents? New exercise routines? Changes in diet or medication? The answers never satisfy. What troubles people most is not the marks themselves, but their placement. They appear in locations difficult to reach alone, along the spine, behind the knees, high on the shoulders, areas the body protects instinctively. The geometry feels intentional. This is where denial begins to strain. The mind can dismiss lost time as distraction. It can explain altered perception as fatigue or stress. But the body does not speak metaphorically. It deals in evidence, however ambiguous. For some, the body's testimony escalates. Scars form where wounds were never remembered. Hair grows back differently around certain areas. Minor but persistent changes in balance, coordination, or sensory processing surface, noticeable only to the person experiencing them. A hand trembles slightly when held still. Hearing sharpens, then dulls. Vision blurs at the periphery. These shifts are subtle, often dismissed by clinicians as normal variation. Yet, to the individual, They register as intrusive reminders that something has intervened without consent or comprehension. Despite this, fear remains strangely muted. People expect violation to leave behind terror or rage. Instead, many report a complex, emotional quiet. Concern. Yes, unease, but also a curious neutrality, as though the body itself has accepted the experience, even if the mind resists it. This discrepancy creates internal tension. How can something so invasive leave so little emotional wreckage? Some suggest the answer lies in the same mechanism that produces missing time. Just as memory recording changes during the os factor, emotional processing may also shift. The nervous system enters a state where distress responses are dampened, allowing the body to undergo unfamiliar experiences without triggering panic. In T-state, the body becomes an instrument rather than an obstacle. Whatever occurs during missing time does not feel violent to the nervous system. It feels procedural, clinical, purpose-driven. This does not make it benign, but it does make it difficult to frame as attack. People often resist this implication. They want clear categories: harm or safety, threat or accident. The body refuses such simplicity. Its marks exist without commentary, demanding interpretation without offering guidance. Eventually, some turn to others who have experienced the same thing. Comparisons begin. The same triangular impressions, the same scoop-like indentations, the same temporary paralysis upon waking. Patterns emerge, not universal, but recurring enough to unsettle. The body, it seems, is being engaged in similar ways across individuals who have never met, in places separated by vast distances. This is where personal mystery begins to resemble something systematic. Researchers note that many marks heal rapidly, leaving little trace. Others persist for years. None follow known pathological patterns. Biopsies revealed nothing unusual. Tissue remains normal, unaltered in composition, and yet the experience leaves behind a bodily memory. People become acutely aware of their physical presence afterward. They notice posture, tension, breath. They develop a heightened sensitivity to internal states, as though their bodies are tuned more finely than before. Some describe this as a gift. Others experience it as a burden. Either way, the body has been changed. It has become a witness. Even those who refuse to explore the larger implications cannot fully escape this knowledge. The body carries proof that something occurred during the absence, something that involved contact, manipulation, or examination. And still, the question persists. By whom? The body does not answer. It only reminds. To move closer to an answer, we must turn to the fragment's surface. When memory begins to loosen its grip, images that emerge not as full scenes, but as impressions, shapes in shadow, forms at the edge of recall, a presence sensed rather than seen. This is where the silence deepens, and where the watchers begin to take shape. Chapter 6. The Watchers in the Dark. When memory begins to return, it does not do so obediently. It surfaces in fragments, detached impressions that refuse chronology. A sense of height without scale, a color without a source. The awareness of being regarded closely and thoroughly by something just beyond the edge of vision. Those who lose time rarely begin with faces. They begin with presence. It is described as unmistakable yet difficult to localize, like pressure felt before touch. The certainty arrives first. I was not alone. Only later do shapes attempt to assemble themselves around that knowledge. The mind resists this process. It offers substitutions. Familiar forms, animals, shadows, human silhouettes glimpsed briefly and dismissed. These impressions hover, unstable, dissolving when examined too directly. And yet, some details persist. Figures are often recalled as slight in build, disproportionate in some subtle way, heads larger than expected, limbs elongated, joints bending with unfamiliar economy. Movement appears efficient rather than fluid, purposeful rather than expressive. Eyes, when remembered, dominate the image, not because of size alone, but because of attention. Experiencers struggle to describe eye contact that does not feel emotional. personal, or evaluative, only observant, as though being studied by an intelligence unconcerned with reassurance or intimidation. Communication. When it occurs, bypasses sound. There are no spoken words, no audible commands. Instead, meaning arrives whole, deposited directly into awareness. Instructions without language, reassurance without tone, information without explanation. People later insist they were not told anything. They simply knew. This form of exchange unsettles more than speech ever could. It leaves no room for misunderstanding, no space for interpretation. Thought and reception blur, creating a sense of participation without consent. Some recall being guided, not pulled or restrained, but directed attention turned here, awareness shifted there. The body follows without resistance, moving as though following an internal cue rather than external force. Others remember immobility, lying or standing without discomfort, unable to move yet unconcerned by the inability. The body remains present, intact, responsive to sensation, but detached from decision. This is where emotional memory fractures most noticeably. Experiencers later struggle to reconcile the neutrality they felt during these moments with the implications of what may have occurred. They expect fear, anger, violation. Instead, they recall a calm so complete it feels unnatural. Researchers have noted this pattern repeatedly. Whatever these watchers are, or whatever role they occupy, they appear to engage the human nervous system in a way that suppresses distress responses. The body remains conscious, compliant, and observational rather than reactive. This does not suggest benevolence. It suggests efficiency. Descriptions of the watchers vary, yet converge around a few recurring forms. Small, gray-toned figures with smooth features and minimal facial expression. Taller, more imposing shapes that remain at a distance, observing rather than interacting. In some accounts, insect-like presences, angular, segmented, distinctly non-human, appear as overseers rather than participants. These variations do not present as contradictions. They present as hierarchy. Experiencers often report a clear distinction between those who engage directly and those who watch from the periphery. The smaller figures act. The larger ones observe. Authority is communicated not through dominance, but through presence alone. What is notably absent is hostility. There is no struggle, no pursuit, no attempt to frighten. The experience unfolds with the inevitability of a procedure already underway. Some recall environments that feel enclosed yet expansive spaces without clear boundaries, lit without visible sources. Surfaces appear smooth, reflective without mirrors. The air feels sterile, neither warm nor cold, absent of smell. Others remember nothing of the setting at all, only the beings themselves, suspended against a void of incomplete recall. When the mind attempts to reconstruct these memories later, it encounters resistance. Images blur, details slip, emotional tone remains intact, but narrative refuses to settle. This has led many to question the authenticity of what they remember. Was it imagination, dream imagery, cultural contamination? These questions arise naturally and persistently, yet they fail to account for one consistent feature: the sameness of experience across individuals who share no background, no belief system, no prior interest in such phenomena. The watchers do not behave like monsters. They do not behave like saviors. They behave like technicians. This characterization disturbs people more than any overt threat. It implies purpose without explanation, interest without empathy, interaction without relationship. To be seen in this way, to be examined without judgment or concern, forces a reconsideration of one's place in the universe. Humans are accustomed to being the observers. Here, that role is reversed. Those who remember, the watchers, often report a lingering sensation. Afterward, not fear, but vulnerability, a sense of having been known thoroughly, measured beyond surface identity, as though something has looked past personality, past history, and engaged directly with the underlying organism. This awareness does not fade easily. It surfaces during moments of stillness, when the world grows quiet again, in the pause between breaths. In the dark, before sleep, the sense of presence returns, not visually, but as a memory of attention. The watchers do not linger physically, but their observation does, And this raises a question more unsettling than any description of form. If these beings observe us during missing time, if they engage the body with precision and restraint, then how does the mind survive such contact? The answer lies not in what is remembered, but in what is hidden, in the structures the mind builds to protect itself from truths it cannot yet hold. To understand that, we must turn inward, to the theater where memory is edited, symbols are substituted, and reality is softened into shapes we can bear. Chapter 7. The Theater of the Mind. Memory does not exist to preserve truth. It exists to preserve continuity. The human mind is less concerned with accuracy than with survival, and when faced with experiences that fracture coherence, it adapts without consultation. It edits. It substitutes. It reshapes, not to deceive, but to protect. Those who lose time often discover this only later, when fragments begin to surface that do not behave like ordinary recollections. They arrive sideways, a flash of imagery while washing dishes, a sudden pressure behind the eyes while drifting towards sleep. A dream so vivid it leaves residue upon waking. These moments do not feel imagined. They feel retrieved, pulled from a depth, usually left undisturbed. The mind, it seems, has been working quietly in the background. One of its most effective tools is the screen memory. Rather than erase the experience entirely, the mind replaces it with something symbolically adjacent, but emotionally manageable. An owl on a fence, a deer frozen in headlights, a childhood dream of floating above the bed. These images hold the structure of the encounter, while stripping it of its most destabilizing elements. Animals appear often in these substitutions. They carry familiarity, innocence, a sense of nature rather than intrusion. An owl's wide eyes echo observation without judgment. A deer's stillness, mere suspension. The symbolism is not random. It is economical, chosen for its ability to contain the experience without igniting fear. Light also plays a role. People recall glowing forms without edges, beams that do not cast shadows, windows filled with brightness that never resolves into shape. These impressions stand in for environments too alien to process directly. The theater of the mind is not concerned with deception. It is concerned with timing. Only when the psyche determines it can tolerate more does the screen begin to thin. Details sharpen. Symbols lose their disguises. The owl's eyes linger too long. The floating sensation acquires direction. The light gains structure. This is why memories often return in stages. A person may live for decades with only a vague unease, a persistent dream, a story that never quite makes sense. Then, during a period of stability, after therapy, after personal loss, after significant change, the mind revisits the archive. Hypnosis has played a controversial role in this process. Critics argue it introduces suggestion, reshaping memory rather than revealing it. Supporters countered that it lowers the barriers that normally guard traumatic material, allowing impressions to surface with less resistance. Both views may hold truth. Under hypnosis, experiencers often retrieve imagery, consistent with known patterns, environments, beings, procedures. Yet what matters most is not the imagery itself, but the emotional coherence that accompanies it. People report a distinct sensation when a memory aligns, a settling, a release of tension, a sense of internal recognition. This suggests the material existed already, waiting for conditions that would allow its emergence. Memory, in this context, behaves less like a recording and more like a layered composition. The surface holds manageable imagery. Beneath it, impressions remain intact, preserved in emotional and sensory form rather than narrative. The mind does not forget what it has decided to hide. It quarantines it. This explains why recovered memories often feel familiar rather than shocking. When details surface, they do not arrive as strangers. They arrive as something long known but carefully avoided. Yet the return of memory is rarely complete. There are gaps that remain stubbornly empty, transitions that refuse reconstruction. The mind releases only what it can integrate, without fracturing identity. People often ask whether they truly want to know everything. The answer shifts over time. Early on, curiosity dominates. Later, restraint emerges. Many come to accept partial recall as sufficient, an outline rather than a full account. Knowing that something occurred becomes more important than knowing exactly what it was. The theater of the mind does not close when memory returns. It remains active, continuing to shape how the experience is understood. Symbol and literal interpretation coexist, neither fully replacing the other. A dream remains a dream, even if it now carries additional weight. This layered understanding allows people to live with ambiguity without being consumed by it. Still, questions persist. Why these symbols? Why these particular substitutions? The answer may lie in shared human imagery archetypes that exist across cultures and eras. Owls appear in folklore as watchers between worlds. Light signifies transition. Floating suggests removal from ordinary constraints. The mind draws from a collective vocabulary when constructing its defenses. This may explain why ancient stories resemble modern accounts more than coincidence would allow. The language changes, the symbols adapt, the structure remains. People who come to terms with their screen memories often describe a gradual shift in self-perception. They no longer view themselves solely as victims of an unexplained event, but as participants in a process larger than individual understanding. This reframing does not bring certainty. It brings tolerance. The ability to hold contradiction, to accept that memory can be both real and mediated, that truth can exist without full clarity. As these internal negotiations unfold, another realization emerges. The experience did not begin with the watchers. It did not end with missing time. It belongs to a much older pattern, one that predates modern language, modern science, even modern fear. To see that pattern clearly, we must step back from individual minds and look across centuries, across stories told long before clocks governed the night. Chapter 8. Echoes across the ages. Long before missing time acquired its modern name, people were already telling its story. They did not speak of clocks, or highways, or stalled engines. They spoke of nights that stretched beyond their measure, of journeys that returned travelers altered, of worlds entered briefly and exited reluctantly. The language differed. The structure did not. In Celtic lore, there are tales of those who wander into hills and do not return until seasons have turned. A night spent in revelry becomes a lifetime beyond the threshold. When the wanderer steps back into the familiar world, time has rearranged itself without apology. These stories were not framed as abductions. They were framed as crossings. Fairy mounds, ringstones, and forest clearings served as points of entry. Music drifted without source. Stillness gathered. The traveler felt drawn forward, unafraid, compelled by a curiosity that did not feel like their own. When they returned, they carried no clear memory of what transpired, only an awareness that something irrevocable had occurred. Some found themselves aged, others unchanged, yet out of step with the lives they had left behind. In Scandinavian folklore, similar patterns appear. There are accounts of those who follow lights into the mountains, only to re-emerge days or years later. Time behaves inconsistently. The land itself seems to participate, closing and opening pathways according to rules not shared with human travelers. Across Asia, stories speak of celestial visitors and hidden realms where time flows differently. In Japan, the tale of Urashima Tar describes a fisherman who rescues a turtle and is invited to an undersea palace. What feels like a short visit becomes centuries upon his return. He steps back into a world that no longer recognizes him. The emotional core remains constant. Disorientation, loss, a quiet sense of having brushed against something immense. Even indigenous traditions across the Americas carry echoes of the same phenomenon. Oral histories describe sky beings who take individuals for instruction or examination, returning them with altered perception and incomplete memory. Time loss is treated not as accident, but as consequence. These stories were not dismissed. They were integrated. Communities built frameworks around them, acknowledging that the world contained layers beyond ordinary perception. Those who returned were often regarded with caution and respect, recognized as having crossed a boundary not meant for frequent passage. What distinguishes these ancient accounts from modern ones is not the experience itself, but the cultural response. In the past, mystery had a place. There were words for it, rituals for it, Spaces where the unexplainable could exist without demanding resolution. The loss of time was not framed as malfunction, it was framed as encounter. Modern society struggles with this. We have trained ourselves to expect explanation, to distrust ambiguity, to pathologize experiences that resist categorization. When time goes missing now, it becomes a problem to solve rather than a reality to integrate. And yet, the echoes persist. The same stillness before the crossing, the same suspension of fear, the same return marked by absence. Only the costumes have changed. Fair folk become non-human entities. Enchanted halls become luminous interiors. Sacred groves become remote highways. The mind updates its symbols to match the era. This continuity across time unsettles researchers yet it offers a powerful suggestion. Whatever underlies missing time is not new. It adapts. Cultural language shifts. But the phenomenon expresses itself through the available vocabulary. In societies steeped in spiritual cosmology, the experience becomes spiritual. In technological cultures, it adopts technological form. This does not make it imaginary, it makes it fluent. Those who study these parallels note that ancient accounts often emphasize transformation rather than trauma. Time loss is not framed as theft, but as initiation. The individual returns changed, sometimes wiser, sometimes burdened, always different. Modern experiencers report similar shifts, though they rarely use the same language. They speak instead of altered priorities, heightened awareness, a persistent sense of connection to something larger and more elusive than everyday life. The echoes across ages suggest that missing time occupies a space between categories. It is not purely psychological, not purely physical, not purely cultural. It sits at an intersection where perception, environment, and something external converge. Ancient societies accepted this intersection as part of the world's fabric. Modern ones attempt to flatten it, to render it either pathological or fraudulent. Yet, the stories continue to surface, refusing erasure. People who encounter these older narratives often experience a strange relief. Recognition arrives not through belief, but through pattern. The realization that what happened to them has happened before many times, under many names. This recognition does not solve the mystery. It contextualizes it, and context, in this case, offers grounding rather than certainty. If missing time has echoed across centuries, if it has worn many faces and borrowed many languages, then perhaps the question is not whether it is real. Perhaps the question is why it persists. What function does it serve? What does it suggest about the nature of time, perception, and human participation in a reality far more layered than we are taught to assume? To approach that question, we must leave story and symbol behind and turn toward another lens, one that attempts, however imperfectly, to measure what refuses containment. We must turn to science. Chapter 9. The Science of the Slip. Science does not begin with certainty. It begins with discomfort. The recognition that observation no longer fits explanation. When anomalies persist, when patterns repeat without compliance, inquiry shifts from dismissal to curiosity. Time, long treated as absolute, has undergone such a shift before. At the dawn of the 20th century, physics confronted a problem it could not ignore. Measurements refused to align. Light behaved inconsistently. Motion altered outcomes in ways that defied intuition. The result was a radical rethinking of time itself. Einstein proposed what experience now suggests repeatedly. Time is not fixed. It stretches. It compresses. It responds to conditions. In the framework of relativity, time is woven together with space, forming a single fabric capable of distortion. Gravity bends it. Velocity alters its flow. Under certain conditions, two observers can experience different durations of the same event. This idea was once considered absurd. Now, it is foundational. Clocks aboard satellites tick differently than those on Earth. Astronauts return, having aged fractions of seconds less than those who remained below. These differences are small, but they are real, measurable, and indisputable. Time slips. The question raised by missing time experiences is not whether time can behave differently. but whether such distortions can occur locally, briefly, unpredictably, and without massive gravitational forces. Physics does not forbid this. It merely lacks a complete mechanism. Some researchers have pointed toward electromagnetic fields. The human brain operates through delicate electrical patterns, susceptible to interference. Strong or fluctuating fields could alter perception, disrupt memory formation, or induce dissociative states. Geological fault lines generate such fields. So do mineral-rich formations, particularly those containing quartz. These areas overlap suspiciously well with reported thin places. In these regions, compass readings falter. Instruments misbehave. Animals avoid or linger without clear reason. Perception, under these conditions, becomes unreliable. Yet perception alone does not account for synchronized experiences. Multiple witnesses lose time together. Clocks fail in tandem. Physical marks appear independently of belief or expectation. This suggests an external component. Some physicists speculate about localized spacetime anomalies, regions where the fabric briefly warps due to unknown interactions, microsingularities, transient wormholes, phenomena that arise and collapse before detection. These ideas remain speculative, bordering on theoretical indulgence. But history offers a reminder. Today's indulgence often becomes tomorrow's framework. Quantum mechanics, once dismissed as mathematical trickery, now underpins modern technology. Non-locality, entanglement, superposition concepts that challenge intuition have proven experimentally valid. At quantum scales, time behaves strangely. Particles exist in multiple states simultaneously. Cause and effect lose their linear authority. Observation itself alters outcome. The universe, at its most fundamental level, does not conform to everyday expectations. Some theorists propose that missing time experiences occur when human consciousness intersects briefly with these deeper structures, not as travelers, but as participants caught at a boundary. Consciousness, after all, is not well understood. It does not reside neatly in any single region of the brain. It arises from interaction, pattern, coherence. Some researchers argue it may be sensitive to spacetime distortions, in ways matter is not. This would explain the consistency of subjective experience across cultures and eras. It would also explain the Oz factor, the sudden stillness, the emotional neutrality, the suspension of fear. If consciousness enters a state where time is no longer dominant, nervous system may respond by dampening reactions calibrated for linear progression. Panic belongs to urgency. Urgency dissolves when time does. This does not require intention. It requires condition. Science, cautious by nature, hesitates to cross into such territory. The language grows thin. The equations lose traction. Yet the data anecdotal. Messy human refuses to disappear. Researchers studying pilots, soldiers, and trauma survivors have documented time distortion under extreme conditions. Seconds stretch, minutes collapse. Memory fragments. The brain's internal clock proves flexible, responsive to threat and novelty. Missing time may represent an extreme version of this phenomenon, one triggered not by danger, but by environmental or external factors that disrupt temporal processing entirely. Still, questions remain. Why the patterns? Why the recurring imagery? Why the apparent engagement with non-human intelligence? Science alone cannot answer these yet, but it offers something essential. Permission to ask without ridicule. Time is not sacred. It is not inviolable. It is a variable. This realization shifts the missing time experience from the realm of impossibility to that of investigation. It reframes the question from, did this happen? To, how could this happen? And perhaps more importantly, what does it reveal about our assumptions? If time can slip, locally, briefly, and selectively, then human experience occupies a far more dynamic reality than daily life suggests. We are not fixed observers. We are embedded participants. And when the fabric of time flexes, even slightly, it leaves ripples. Ripples that extend beyond the moment itself, beyond memory, beyond the event, into the lives that continue afterward. To understand those ripples, we must return to the human story, to what happens after the experience, when time resumes its ordinary rhythm, but nothing feels quite the same. Chapter 10. The Ripple Effect. When time resumes its familiar pace, it does so without apology. The world does not pause to accommodate what has happened. Responsibilities remain. Conversations continue, schedules reassert themselves with quiet insistence. From the outside, nothing appears altered. Inside, however, something has shifted. Those who lose time often describe the aftermath not as disruption, but as recalibration. Life continues, yet its weight redistributes certain concerns, loosen their grip. Others press closer, demanding attention they once lacked. This change does not announce itself dramatically. It unfolds gradually, in choices so small they barely register at first. People linger longer in moments of stillness. They grow impatient with trivial urgency. They notice how often time is spent defending expectations rather than inhabiting experience. The missing hours cast a long shadow, not dark, but instructive. Many report an increased sensitivity to their surroundings. Sound carries differently. Silence feels textured rather than empty. Light, especially at dawn or dusk, draws prolonged attention, as though the world offers itself more deliberately than before. This heightened awareness does not feel mystical. It feels practical, a recalibration of attention toward what feels grounded and present. Time, once treated as an infinite resource, becomes something observed, even respected. Relationships shift as well. Some deepen, strengthened by vulnerability. Others strain under unspoken distance. Those who carry missing time often struggle to articulate the experience without unsettling those around them. Words fail. Analogies fall flat. Silence becomes easier. This silence is not always lonely. For some, it creates a private, interior space where reflection thrives. For others, it becomes a barrier that isolates, slowly and persistently. The difference often lies in whether the experience can be integrated rather than hidden. Many experiencers report a growing discomfort with superficial explanations. They find themselves less willing to accept convenient narratives, less patient with certainty offered docilely. This does not turn them cynical, it turns them discerning. Questions replace conclusions. What is time, really? What does it mean to be present? How much of reality operates beyond attention? These questions surfaced uninvited during ordinary activities. Washing dishes, walking familiar routes, sitting quietly with nothing demanding response. Some notice a shift in values. Ambition softens. Competition loses its edge. The pursuit of accumulation of things, of status, feels oddly hollow. In its place emerges a quiet emphasis on experience, connection, and authenticity. This shift is not universal. Others respond differently. They become hyper-focused on control, schedules, tied in. Structure hardens. The unpredictability of missing time leaves a lingering desire to anchor life firmly, to eliminate ambiguity. Wherever possible, both responses reflect the same underlying truth. The experience has disrupted the illusion of continuity. People who lose time no longer assume the future will unfold exactly as expected. This awareness can inspire presence or anxiety. Often, it produces both in alternating measure. Some experiences describe an increased empathy toward others, not because they feel morally elevated, but because they recognize vulnerability more readily. The understanding that reality can fracture quietly makes judgment feel unnecessary, even crude. Others report a growing connection to the natural world. Forests feel less decorative. Open skies feel less empty. Landscapes acquire depth, as though layered with unseen activity. Thin places no longer feel abstract. They feel accessible, even conversational. The desert, in particular, leaves a lasting impression. Its vastness becomes a reminder of scale, of how small human narratives are within a broader system. This perspective does not diminish meaning. It clarifies it. Some experiencers developed creative impulses they did not possess before. Writing emerges. Drawing. Music. These expressions do not aim to explain the experience, but to translate it into form, rhythm, and metaphor. The missing time becomes a catalyst, rather than a wound. Not everyone welcomes these changes. There is grief involved. Grief for certainty. Grief for a version of self that moved through life, unquestioning. Grief for hours that will never be reclaimed or understood. This grief rarely finds language. It sits quietly beneath daily routines, surfacing in moments of fatigue or introspection. Over time, most experiencers come to an unspoken agreement with the unknown. They stop demanding answers. This is not resignation. It is accommodation. The missing time does not recede, but it integrates. It becomes one thread among many, woven into a larger narrative rather than dominating it. People learn to live with a life that includes gaps. They discover that wholeness does not require completeness. Still, one challenge remains. Speaking, when and whether, to share the experience. How to frame it. How to protect oneself from dismissal without retreating into isolation. Some choose silence indefinitely. Others speak selectively, learning through trial where curiosity ends and judgment begins. In recent years, this calculation has shifted slightly. Language has softened. Cultural resistance has weakened. Conversations once confined to whispers now occur in daylight. Cautiously, but openly. This change does not erase the burden, but it redistributes it. The ripple effect extends outward, from the individual, to relationships, to communities, and eventually, to institutions. To understand how the collective response has begun to change, and why it matters, we must turn to the places where silence was once enforced, where denial shaped policy, where the unknown was held at bay by authority rather than understanding. Chapter 11. The Weight of Silence. Silence has mass. It presses inward, shaping behavior without announcing itself. For those who carry missing time, silence becomes both shield and burden, protective in public, corrosive in private. In the years following an experience, many learn to speak around it, rather than about it. They develop fluency in deflection. A missing evening becomes a long drive. An unexplained absence becomes exhaustion. The truth hides in plain sight, diluted by ordinary language. This is not dishonesty. It is adaptation. The social cost of speaking plainly reveals itself quickly. Curiosity curdles into skepticism. Concern hardens into diagnosis. The story becomes something to be corrected rather than understood. So people learn to weigh their words. They test the waters with half-statements. They observe reactions carefully. A raised eyebrow, a tightened smile, a paused too long. These are cues to retreat. Over time, silence becomes habit, and habits, repeated often enough, shape identity. The unspoken experience settles into the background of the self, influencing decisions quietly. People choose careers that feel stabilizing. They avoid environments that mirror the conditions of the event, or they seek them out compulsively, drawn back to the edge of understanding. The silence extends beyond conversation. It enters memory. Experiencers often report that they avoid thinking about the missing time altogether, not consciously, but through distraction. Busyness, structure, entertainment, anything that keeps the mind from drifting too close to the gap. Yet silence is not empty. It accumulates pressure. Without outlet, questions ferment. Doubt grows. People wonder whether they fabricated the experience, whether their memory betrayed them, whether they are somehow flawed for being unable to move on. This internal conflict proves heavier than the event itself. Eventually, many reach a threshold. A moment arrives when silence no longer feels protective. It feels restrictive. The effort required to maintain it outweighs the risk of breaking it. For some, this moment comes in therapy. For others, in late-night conversations with someone who listens without interruption. Increasingly, it arrives through connection with others who share the experience. Support groups, formal or informal, become spaces where silence loosens. Here, missing time is not challenged or dissected immediately. It is acknowledged. That acknowledgement alone shifts its weight. People describe an almost physical sensation, when they first speak freely. Shoulders lowering, breath deepening, a release long deferred. These communities do not offer answers. They offer language, shared terms, shared structures, the ability to say that happened to me too without qualifiers or apology. This does not resolve the mystery, but it transforms it from private burden to collective inquiry. Within these spaces, patterns emerge, not just in experiences, but in responses. The same doubts, the same hesitations, the same gradual movement from isolation toward cautious openness. Silence, once broken, does not vanish entirely. It becomes selective. People learned the difference between secrecy and discretion. They choose when to speak and when to remain quiet, not out of fear, but out of discernment. This shift alters how the experience is carried. The missing time becomes part of a broader narrative. Rather than a hidden fault line, it no longer threatens identity. It informs it there is power in this integration, not because it resolves the unknown, but because it restores agency. The experiencer is no longer solely defined by what happened during the absence, but by how they choose to live with it afterward. As more people speak, patterns surface beyond individual stories. The silence that once isolated individuals is revealed as systemic, reinforced by cultural norms, institutional denial, and the discomfort of confronting uncertainty. When many people share similar stories and remain silent for similar reasons, silence itself becomes evidence, and evidence, eventually, attracts attention. Institutions begin to respond not because the phenomenon changes, but because its visibility does. Language shifts, tone softens. What was once dismissed as fringe becomes cautiously acknowledged. The weight of silence does not disappear overnight, but it redistributes from the individual to the collective, and as that redistribution continues, a new question arises. What happens when silence no longer protects authority, when the unknown is no longer confined to the margins? To answer that, we must turn toward the structures that once insisted nothing was happening, and examine how that insistence has begun to falter. Chapter 12, The Official Veil. For decades, authorities spoke with certainty. There was nothing to see, nothing to investigate, nothing that required explanation. Reports of missing time, unidentified craft, and unexplained encounters were filed away under convenient labels. Misidentification, stress response, cultural myth-making. The language of dismissal was practiced, efficient, and final. This certainty was not accidental. Institutions rely on coherence. They function by projecting control, by maintaining the appearance of comprehensive understanding. Admitting uncertainty, especially about the sky, about time, about human vulnerability, threatens that projection, so the veil remained in place. Those who spoke publicly were marginalized. Pilots were discouraged from reporting anomalies. Military encounters were reclassified as equipment failure or training exercises. Civilian accounts were redirected toward psychology rather than investigation. This was not necessarily malice. It was management. The unknown, left uncontained, invites destabilization, and destabilization undermines authority. Yet silence has a lifespan. As technology advanced, data accumulated in ways that resisted erasure. Radar logs, flight recordings, satellite imagery, testimony from trained observers with reputations built on precision rather than imagination. The narrative began to strain. It did not collapse suddenly. It frayed. Language soft first. Terms shifted Identified flying objects became unidentified aerial phenomena. Later, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Each revision reduced stigma, widened possibility, and acknowledged complexity without admitting conclusion. The change was subtle but significant. Words matter. They shape what can be discussed without ridicule. They create space for inquiry where none existed before. As terminology evolved, so did tone. Officials spoke cautiously rather than dismissively. Questions replaced denials. Still, admission came in fragments. Yes, objects were observed. Yes, Their behavior defied known technology. No, their origin could not be confirmed. Missing time remained largely unaddressed. It was too personal, too subjective, too disruptive to acknowledge openly. Time anomalies challenge more than airspace. They challenge foundational assumptions about reality. Yet, even here, cracks formed. Pilots describe lapses in temporal awareness during encounters. Military personnel reported discrepancies between mission duration and perceived time. Data refused to align neatly. The official veil grew thinner. This shift did not validate every claim, nor did it confirm specific explanations. What it did was something arguably more important. It legitimized uncertainty. The unknown was no longer framed as failure or fantasy. It became a subject of cautious attention. Investigation replaced dismissal. Silence became unsustainable. For experiencers, this change carried complex consequences. Validation brought relief but also exposure. Stories once shared in private risked being consumed by spectacle. Media attention simplified nuance. Serious inquiry competed with sensationalism. The experience of missing time remained deeply personal, resistant to soundbite treatment, yet the cultural atmosphere had shifted. People spoke more freely. They asked questions without immediately retracting them. Curiosity became acceptable again. Institutions, slow to change, followed reluctantly. Task forces were established. Reports declassified. Acknowledgements issued with careful wording. Each step forward revealed how much remained unspoken. The veil was not lifted. It was adjusted. And in that adjustment, something profound occurred. The responsibility for understanding shifted outward. The mystery no longer belonged solely to individuals carrying unexplained experiences. It became a shared problem, one that spanned disciplines, institutions, and worldviews. This redistribution did not bring answers. It brought humility, a recognition that certainty had been overstated, that control had limits, that reality contains layers not yet mapped. Missing time, once dismissed as error or fantasy, now occupied a liminal space between experience and investigation. Not proven, not disproven, present. This acknowledgement changed the emotional landscape. People no longer felt entirely alone with their absence. The weight of disbelief lightened, even if the mystery itself remained intact. And with that shift came a quieter realization. If authority does not have all the answers, if time can slip without explanation, then perhaps the question is no longer what happened. Perhaps it is, how do we live, knowing that it can happen at all? To answer that, we must move toward acceptance, not as surrender, but as orientation, toward a way of inhabiting mystery without demanding its resolution. Chapter 13. The Eternal Question. Time returns without ceremony. It does not explain itself. It does not acknowledge the interruption. It simply resumes its forward motion, minute after minute, as though continuity had never been threatened. The clock ticks. The calendar advances. Days gather into weeks, weeks into years. From the outside, nothing appears altered. But for those who have lost time, the return is not a restoration. It is a negotiation. Life resumes, yet it does so under revised terms. The old assumption that time is stable, obedient, guaranteed, no longer holds. In its place emerges a quieter understanding. Time functions, but it does not promise. This knowledge settles slowly. At first, it appears as vigilance. People check clocks more often. They measure duration carefully. They anchor themselves to schedules, to routines, to the reassuring structure of ordinary progression. This phase does not last. Eventually, vigilance gives way to acceptance. Not resignation, but adjustment. Those who have experienced missing time begin to sense that certainty was never as complete as it seemed. The illusion was comforting, but fragile. The world did not change when time slipped. Perception did. This realization alters how moments are inhabited. Attention sharpens not with urgency, but with presence. People linger longer in silence. They notice transitions. Dusk becoming night. Breath entering and leaving the body. The subtle shift of light across a familiar room. These details were always there, but now they carry weight. Time is no longer assumed, it is observed. The missing hours remain inaccessible. They do not return in dreams or memories or recovered narratives. They exist as a clean absence, a section of life sealed off from recollection. Over time, the urge to retrieve them fades. Not because curiosity dies, but because it transforms. The question, "What happened to me?" loosens its grip. It gives way to something broader, less possessive. What does this say about the world I live in? This question does not demand an answer. It opens space. People begin to understand that human life unfolds inside systems that do not revolve around human understanding. Time, once treated as a constant, reveals itself as a condition. Flexible, responsive, and indifferent to expectation. This does not diminish meaning. It reframes it. Meaning no longer depends on control or comprehension. It arises from participation, from attention, from the willingness to exist within uncertainty without retreating into fear. The desert remains vast. It does not explain itself. It does not reassure. Its openness offers no guarantee of safety or comprehension. Yet, those who have lost time often feel drawn to such landscapes, not out of compulsion, but recognition. These places do not pretend. They reflect the true scale of existence. They strip away the illusion of mastery and replace it with perspective. Under an open sky, the missing hours feel less like theft and more like encounter. Not with answers, but with proportion. Forests, too, change their character. Silence beneath the canopy feels deliberate rather than empty. The land no longer registers as background. It feels aware, not conscious in a human sense, but engaged in processes that operate beyond immediate perception. This awareness does not breed paranoia. It breeds respect. People move differently through the world afterward. They rush less. They listen more. They treat time not as a resource to be consumed, but as a current to move within. The clock still matters. Appointments still arrive. Deadlines still exist. Responsibilities still assert themselves. But the clock no longer carries authority over meaning. It becomes a tool rather than a ruler. This shift brings relief. Without the need to account for every moment, life softens. Gaps no longer threaten identity. Silence no longer demands explanation. The self becomes elastic enough to include absence without collapse. Those who integrate the experience fully often describe a quiet peace, not happiness, not transcendence, but steadiness. A grounded sense that life does not require total visibility to be complete. They stop asking whether the experience was real. Reality, they learn, does not require validation. They stop arguing with skeptics, not because skepticism is wrong, but because persuasion feels unnecessary. The experience belongs to them, and that is sufficient. Over time, the missing hours lose their sharpness. They become like a distant horizon always present, never intrusive. The absence integrates into the narrative of a life, lived attentively rather than defensively. Some experiences find that their relationship with fear changes. Fear does not disappear, but it becomes specific, grounded. Immediate threats still provoke response, but existential fear, the fear of not knowing, of uncertainty, of loss of control, loosens its hold. They have already encountered the unknown and survived it, not heroically, quietly. This survival does not come from understanding what happened, but from discovering that life continues meaningfully without full explanation. This realization carries ethical weight. People become less inclined to dominate uncertainty with false certainty. They grow more patient with ambiguity, more tolerant of difference, more cautious with judgment, knowing how fragile perception can be reshapes. How they evaluate others' experiences. They listen differently. They ask fewer questions meant to corner truth, and more questions meant to understand perspective. This shift, subtle and personal, ripples outward. Families change. Conversations deepen. Communities form not around belief, but around openness. The mystery does not need to be shared to be honored. Time loss does not become identity. It becomes context, a reference point that quietly informs how life is approached. Years later, many experiencers realize something unexpected. They are grateful, not for the event itself, but for what it revealed. The world is larger, stranger, and more flexible than they were taught, and they are still here. Living, loving, choosing. This gratitude does not romanticize the experience. There is no claim of enlightenment. There is simply acknowledgement that certainty was never the foundation of meaning. Presence was. As life continues, the eternal question remains, not as an obsession, as a companion. What is time? Not as measured by clocks, but as lived. Not as owned, but as shared. Not as guaranteed, but as given. Those who lose time learn that existence does not move in a straight line. It curves. It folds. It pauses without warning. And yet, meaning persists not in spite of this, but because of it. The story does not close with revelation. It closes with orientation, with a way of standing inside mystery without demanding conquest. Somewhere, tonight, someone drives a familiar road. The radio hums. The dashboard glows. The clock ticks forward obediently. For now, the land watches. Time holds its shape. And the world waits patiently, silently, for the moment when certainty loosens again. Just enough to remind us that reality is not fixed, but alive, and that to be human is not to control time, but to live, fully awake, inside its vast and flexible embrace. When the story ends, the world does not. The road continues beyond the final sentence. The land holds its shape. Night arrives, as it always has, without announcement, without urgency, without concern for interpretation. Nothing asks to be resolved. What remains is not an answer, but a posture. The listener, the reader, the experiencer, each carries something forward. Not knowledge in the conventional sense, not proof or instruction, but an altered orientation toward time and presence. The absence stays absent. It does not return as memory or revelation. It does not soften into metaphor. It remains what it has always been, a space where something occurred beyond perception. And yet, that space is not empty. It holds consequence. People do not leave the experience changed in obvious ways. There are no visible marks, no immediate transformations. Life resumes along familiar lines. Conversations continue. Responsibilities persist. The ordinary reasserts itself with remarkable efficiency. But beneath this continuity, something has shifted. A subtle recalibration. Time is no longer assumed to be stable, simply because it behaves that way most days. Silence is no longer mistaken for emptiness. The world feels less like a mechanism and more like a process ongoing, adaptive, alive in ways that resist naming. This awareness does not demand belief. It asks for attention. The desert remains vast, not because it overwhelms, but because it does not explain itself. The sky remains open, not as invitation, but as a reminder. The land does not offer reassurance, yet it does not threaten. It simply is, and in that being, it teaches without instruction. The story has traced missing time not as anomaly, not as pathology, but as encounter and interruption that reveals rather than disrupts. What is encountered may never be known. What is revealed, however, is enduring. Human certainty is provisional. Meaning does not depend on mastery. Present matters more than explanation. These truths do not announce themselves. They emerge quietly, through reflection rather than declaration. They settle slowly, like dust after wind has passed. The clock continues to tick, but now it does so within a larger silence. Time is no longer the unquestioned ruler of experience. It is a participant, one among many forces shaping perception. The world does not operate solely according to human metrics, and yet, human life remains deeply, profoundly significant, not because it understands everything, but because it notices. The story ends here, but the question does not. It lingers not as disturbance, but as companion. What is time when it cannot be fully trusted? What is presence when memory cannot account for it? What is meaning when certainty dissolves? There are no answers offered, only space, and perhaps that is enough. To live attentively, to listen carefully, to accept that not all experiences arrive with explanations attached. Some arrive only to widen the world. The night deepens, the land holds, Time moves on. Most of the time, and somewhere within that vast, patient movement, the human story continues. Not smaller for what it does not know, but larger for what it is willing to hold.